Before we begin, okay, we are recording. Sorry about that. Before we begin, we want to outline the roles in this space so we can make sure that we're engaging with each other in a shared understanding. So state staff or staff with ODHS are responsible for drafting and filing administrative rules. Their role in this RAC is to explain statutory requirements, policy intent, and operational considerations, and to listen and learn from RAC members as proposed rules are developed and implemented. Community members and partners are here because your lived experience, professional experience, professional expertise, community knowledge are essential to this process. RAC members are consultants, and your input helps us identify impacts, unintended consequences, equity considerations, and opportunities to strengthen how rules are implemented. Your voice matters, and this space is intentionally designed to center community perspectives. RACs are one of the ways that we work together to ensure that administrative rules are not only legally sound, but equitable, workable, and reflective of the communities they impact. So again, I just want to thank you all for being here and for engaging in this important work. And if there are no questions about the purpose of why we're here, we will get started. Okay. So it doesn't look like we have any questions. So we're going to jump right into our review of the summary of OAR changes. So this document was provided with the RAC materials, and those are on the RAC website. So I'll start out by letting you all know that really the goal of this OAR update was to incorporate important policy guidance that had been issued since our last major rule update in 2019. So many of the updates aren't introducing new processes or expectations, merely incorporating those policies. So in section 0002, which is where all of our definitions are, many of the abuse type definitions were updated to add clarity to areas that we knew there were some confusion. We also made updates to hopefully streamline them a bit when it comes to how they're cited in abuse reports. In section 0030, this is our confidentiality section. This section was updated to really help differentiate between the different levels of APS information and who is eligible to receive that information based on the level. So this update was important to make sure there was a clear understanding of where those confidentiality rules lie. Okay, we created section 0055. This is a brand new section, and this section explains APS's jurisdiction in all of the various situations. Okay, I'm just so you all know, once we get through the summary, I will open up each section for comment. So right now I'm just going over what you can expect for each section. Okay, so the screening section, which is under 0060, this has been expanded. And since sending you out your agenda, some additional language has been made to the screening section that I would like to bring to your attention. I'm going to bring up the rules. Okay. You should all be able to see my screen. I will zoom in to help. Okay. So since sending you our draft copy of the rules, in the process of reviewing our rules, we did identify some ambiguity in language in our statutes related to reporters and their reports of abuse. It's this ambiguity that resulted in some additional changes to this draft, along with the reasons we are issuing a temporary rule, which we will explore later on in the agenda. In 0060 intakes and screening, we have removed section 3. This section covered that reporters must be contacted and provided a screening decision. Based on information during the review of these OARs, that isn't something that we have statutory authority to do, so we are removing it. Okay, let's see. Next, we have the community and facility investigation section. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. So we did update and expand the community and the facility investigation section. This is also a section in which we made additional changes since we sent you out the rules. So in the community section, I just want to point out the additional change that we made. This was under 10. So it's the 0100 APS investigations community. And you scroll down to 10. I apologize for the scrolling. All right. So when a community APS investigation has been through all final review processes and has been marked as final, notifications may occur. So in A, we are removing the reporter from the notifications based upon the review that doesn't provide statutory authority for that. Okay, so this is one of the additional changes we made to the community section. And now I'm going to show you the change that we made to the facility section. This section is under 6B. We are deleting 6B in its entirety. So this portion of the rule provided an opportunity for the reporter to accompany the investigator to the site of a reported incident. Again, after review of these rules, it was determined that this language was probably left over from an older rule rewrite that really spoke to the reporter's involvement in a complaint at a licensed facility. So it's being removed based upon APS statute, not supporting that. Okay. That wraps up the review of the changes by section. Now I will take you through each of the section that we just talked about, and this is your opportunity to provide comments on that section or anything else you would like to have us take into consideration. So the first one is our purpose and scope. On the slide are questions to you. Do the changes make sense? Written in plain language? And did you identify any impacts outside of what the department identified in our impact statements? Yes, Steph, we will definitely be providing you a copy of these. And they can be found via the RAC meeting website. So I'm going to turn it over to RAC members. Like I said, if you would like to speak up, just raise your hand, state your name.
We do have a question in chat from Steph.
Okay.
Will these new changes be provided for us to review?
Yes. So that's what I meant about we will provide a copy of these updated changes on the RAC website. And I can also provide them via email to the RAC members. Okay, I will move past purpose and scope. So next, that brings us to our definitions. The questions for each one will be the same, so I'll just turn it over to RAC members. Anyone that would like to comment?
All right, I saw Alice first, and then we'll move on to Natalie.
Yeah, thank you. So I am looking at on page 12 of the what was shared with us, the definition of basic care. And I don't know if we can pull up, put those on the screen. But for me, it was page 12. There we go. Yeah, so this addition of providing a safe environment raised some concerns for us. We represent home care workers and personal support workers. And having the expectation that they would be responsible for the consumer's home environment seems problematic.
Okay. Anything else you want to provide on that for consideration?
Yeah, just that, we have a lot of examples of home care workers that go to a consumer's home and find a hazardous condition. They report that to the report that to the case manager, but they're not like on their task list. Like they can't really address the hazardous condition or correct the condition. So that is kind of like where does that make sense? Where the concern's coming from there?
Mm-hmm.
And I did talk to some of our workers and like they have some of the consumers they serve are homeless. So how could, the care provider be responsible for making sure that their environment, um, is safe?
Okay. Thank you. We have got that down. So
Natalie's next up.
Natalie, okay, perfect. Go
Mhm.
ahead, Natalie.
Thank you. I am looking at page 5. I just had some clarification questions. Could be just me, but in case others were confused. So page 5, it's kind of, let's see, it's in the middle of the page. It says the part about, sorry, I can't find it. It's A right there. The last, for the purpose of these rules, an adult without capacity or the ability to express themselves can be neglected. This determination is made by evaluating the totality of the circumstances. And to me, totality of circumstances is very broad. And I thought that more specificity and maybe that, or if it's linked to something in the investigation part of ORA 411-0200100. So just some concern about the broadness of that.
Okay, thank you.
And then
Go
one
ahead.
more on that page.
Yeah.
Sorry, I guess it put my hand down. Zoom
No,
does
all
that.
good.
And that had to do with the bottom of the page, item C, talking about spiritual services. And it wasn't clear to me, maybe with some of the phrasing, whether that is separate from any spiritual consultation or services and not connected to service delivery, because I feel like there might be circumstances where there's some services delivered along with spiritual consultation. So that wasn't quite clear to me from that part. So that's my feedback. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Next up, we have Fred.
First, I had a question in the section before that I hadn't pulled up my notes to myself for the purpose and scope section, but
Mhm.
wanted to clarify or confirm around the subsection for availability that is deleting references to APS providing their investigative or protective services in nursing facilities. I know this has been an ongoing issue for LTCO at least since 2017, 2018, when there was that change. Is this change in the rules just confirming that APS will not, or more so APD, will not be reconsidering APS going into allegations of abuse and neglect in nursing facilities? So that's the question I have. I don't know if anybody here can answer that now from APD, but and then I did
Yeah.
have some definition questions I wanted to come to.
Yeah, Fred, that is correct. But I will ask John Thompson, our lead policy analyst, to see if he wants to share anything else about that. But you are correct. It is to clarify that these rules don't apply in the nursing facilities. John?
Yes, hi, I'm John Thompson, and I'm the lead for the APS Policy and Technical Assistance Group. Yes, Fred, I would say that is basically a leftover from before the change to the investigations of allegations of complaints about care in nursing facilities was transferred back to the nursing facility survey unit. So that's all that is intended to reflect.
Okay. So and appreciate that, John. Thank you. So to the definitions, the definition of physical abuse, I was wondering if we could get clarification on the addition of the phrase use of physical force. I think that's new in this definition. I know it's not in the statutory definition.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So physical force actually was in the prior language. It was just under the section that spoke about what physical abuse includes, the use of physical force that may result in bodily injury, physical pain, or impairment. So that isn't a new standard. It was updated because physical abuse means the non-accidental use of physical force that results or may result in bodily injury, physical pain, or impairment. A and B is supposed to represent assistance in applying that standard.
And appreciate that clarification. I'm trying to see if I'm missing something in this definition. So I think the concern here for me is that the way the definition was previously, or currently written is that physical abuse can be two different types of physical abuse. There is the use of physical force or, other types of physical injury that may not actually require use of physical force. The way it's being proposed to be written here is all type of physical abuse will require the physical force, which is a narrowing of the statutory definition. So I would think if APD wants to narrow that definition, they should work with the legislature to do so. So that's one concern, at least in the way I'm reading it. And then, sorry, I had one other definition I was going to bring up. Maybe I can come back to me because I think I'm over my 3 minutes. So.
All right. Thank you, Fred. We have Nicolette up next.
Yes, my question is on page 5 under the definitions. It is under the neglect letter, big letter B. And there was a change there from may to must. I'll wait till you kind of pull it up there. So yeah, right there on B. That expectation for care may, it used to say may, and now it's been changed to must. And I'm just curious as to why it was changed to must, because I do think that it's potentially problematic because you're talking about an assumed responsibility just based off of a relationship alone. And I think that it contraindicates like a familial relationship, a spouse or a son or daughter. Those relationships may indicate responsibility based off of the circumstances, but not always must. And so I think that we're missing a key piece there, or we're assigning responsibility to potentially family members based off of relationships, which would not be potentially that agreement, so to speak. So I think we need to be careful about putting must there instead of may.
Okay, thank you, Nicolette. I will say, we're definitely gonna look into this one. We did make some changes in the rule that took us from a former term of shall to must. So you may be bringing up a good example where we plugged in must and it may not fit here. So thank you for that feedback.
And then I also, on the definitions, I have feedback on page 10, at the bottom of page 10, little h. And it's talking about the wrongful use of a physical or chemical restraint of an adult. Yeah, right there. Okay. And there was an addition of a meaningful assessment, and I'm curious what you mean by meaningful and why that was added versus just having a regular assessment. And I think if we're going to add the word meaningful, that probably needs to be defined as to what the expectation is there, and why that was added in as an addition.
All right, thank you for that.
So I have a few more on definitions. I want to be sensitive to the 3 minutes. On page 12, number 8, where it talks about APS risk management.
Yes.
Same thing. We added in who is at risk of serious harm. And I would just recommend that if we're going to start kind of changing that verbiage, and I know it's just jumping ahead of where it was initially, but it does kind of change it does create some ambiguity. And what I would recommend in this section is that in order to support consistency, we add a definition of at risk of serious harm. And arguably, we could use CMS's definition of the strong likelihood that an adult will eminently experience an event, condition, injury, or other outcome that is adverse or detrimental.
So Nicolette, in this one, what we intended to do here was to align this definition with our risk of serious harm, which is a component of neglect. So we really just took it from serious risk of harm, and we're changing it to a risk of serious harm, which is part of the neglect element or definition. And risk of serious harm is also one that we define. So does that change your concerns?
So is risk of, I'm just cursoring through really quick. So risk of
Yeah.
serious harm is defined in the definitions.
Yes, so it is on, and I can bring it up and show you all. Let me just.
Oh yeah, I can see it. Again, I mean, I think it just, and I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate that. I'm just wondering, even under this risk of serious harm, where it says the individual is likely to incur substantial injury or loss.
Yeah.
You know, even using that CMS definition of the strong likelihood, and just kind of keeping that consistency in the language across the board, I think would be helpful.
Okay. Can you, will you just define CMS for me, just for those on the call that may not know what that means?
That's the Centers of Medicare Medicaid Services.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll be.
No, that's okay. All right. I'm going to make sure everyone has time to give comments on definitions before we move forward. So,
L'Oreal is up next.
okay, thank you. Lori?
L'Oreal.
L'Oreal.
That's all right. Same thing on page 12. And please excuse me, this is not my first rack, but is my first rack with APS. So I do have a question up towards the top on provider safety. Let's see. Where was that? Sorry, I should have written the number down. I had the concern that as a provider that goes into consumers' homes, there's already a existing safety considerations that we walk into that aren't being addressed even through assessment. Whether it's a case manager or Medicare or anyone else. And that's, for example, hoarding. Hoarding seems to be a very big issue these days. And I don't, there's sometimes little that a provider can do about that. And it's not called out. So I'm concerned too, just with the language, also substance abuse and alcohol abuse is not always visual until a provider is actually in that consumer's home and working with them. And that provides danger to the provider and the consumer. So I'm concerned about that language.
Okay, and is this, are you referring to the basic care that was brought up earlier?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. All right.
Yeah,
perfect.
providing particularly providing a safe environment that
Got it.
that needs to include some other definitions, I think. What is a safe environment? Because we walk into dangerous situations frequently, for our safety and the consumer's safety.
Okay. Thank you.
All
Susanna,
right,
next.
we also have some questions going on in comments. One from Steph. Will these, oh, sorry, we got that. Will these new changes be provided for us to review? But we also have another question about the definition section from Steph.
Okay, go ahead.
And
Steph.
I apologize, this is Steph Delaney to the Long-Term Care Ombudsman's office, and I cannot get Zoom to raise my hand.
Oh, no worries.
So my questions were on my page 6 with the verbal abuse definition.
Okay, yeah.
And my first question is, why is spitting considered verbal abuse when it's actually a physical act? And I think it should belong in the physical abuse section, and that's in B. Because spitting can be considered assault, which would be a physical act again. So I don't know if it's appropriately placed here.
Okay.
Um,
I
Go ahead, sorry.
I think one comment that I would have that comes to mind with spitting is typically with physical abuse. There may be an emotional response or reaction to the conduct. So in other words, it may not be anything that's going to cause an injury or create discomfort. It's more of one of those situations where you may have an alleged victim experience an emotional response to that, at being disrespectful, being, just all of the things that come along with that. I will say it's not uncommon for situations to fall under maybe multiple abuse types. And that's where it's really up to the investigator to use those really good critical thinking skills and identify the most appropriate abuse type. But we're definitely taking down that feedback. So thank you.
And the second piece is actually in this same definition, verbal abuse B. And I just want to make sure that this section where it says includes intimidation, humiliation, etc., related to gender identity, sexual orientation, and other protected status, that all of those apply to someone that doesn't fall under other protective statuses. Because I don't think it's really clear that all of these terms are included in the general definition of verbal abuse. And I believe they should be.
Okay.
It looks like that really just calls it out for this special protective statuses and not for anyone.
Okay. So one thing that I'll share that may help, one thing that we did with the definitions in rule writing, we have our definition that gives you the standards. So verbal and emotional abuse means threatening significant physical harm or threatening or causing significant emotional harm to an adult. A, B, and C are demonstrative. They are primarily used to assist in the application of the standard. And so the standard, the official definition of verbal and emotional abuse, is D. So A, B, and C are the sections that just explain D more. It gives more explanatory information for application. Does that help?
It helps me, but from the ombudsman's perspective, we often see A, B, and C used to screen things out because it doesn't fit. The local office doesn't feel that it fits into this. And I think this adds another level of, I guess, that description that will allow the local office to screen out abuse when it really does fall under this causing significant emotional harm.
Okay, thank you.
And the only other comment I had in the definitions is on page 9. And I'm sorry if I'm over time. This will be my last comment.
It's okay, thank you. Yeah.
Page 9 talks about care plan, and I just want to point out that the language in the adult foster home rule refers to care plans, and the language in the assisted living and residential care facilities refers to service plan. And so I don't know if you want to include both. I think you should include both of those for clarification and alignment of the other rules.
Okay. Good
Thank you.
information. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Steph. We'll move on to Fred.
I wasn't ready because last time I had the Zoom up, I was going through the rules again. I thought Alice was next. So,
Sorry to catch you.
no, that's okay. So, and with that, actually on the same page that Steph was just on, page 9, this was the other definition I was trying to look for now. Now I'm scrolling back to it, but I actually have a couple comments under that involuntary seclusion rule. So I'm trying to, my notes here don't fully align with where I had them written. So under sub big B, little I, they're using, so it's saying that, involuntary seclusion effectively is not abuse if used as part of a, so if the restriction is used as part of a care plan or IBL, and then it says after other interventions have failed. And I wasn't sure what that was indicating. It seemed a little out of place to me just because care plans or IBLs are things that are done in agreement with the residents of a facility. So I wasn't sure the after other interventions have failed seemed that this might be indicating something to be done to an individual that's not in agreement with the resident.
I believe the intent of that was to acknowledge the fact that landing on the need for an IBL isn't the first choice. Usually we would want to see other interventions be tried that may be that may not place as much restriction on the individual. So it was really just a call out that this is person-centered. Before we move to restrictiveness, we should be trying any and all other interventions. John, I'll just double check with John and see if there was anything he'd have to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
Okay.
And it's a good comment because we may not want it in there, but the intent of it was to prevent someone from just saying, oh, I need a care plan. Fine, here's a care plan. And so a provider writes a care plan that says they need a bed rail and okay, I'm good now. Well, no, you need to show that you've gone through the steps required to address the needs in other ways. And that also goes, I think, to the earlier question about a meaningful assessment, which was a great comment. Thank you. It's an assessment that shows that least restrictive techniques have been tried progressively, and now there's a need demonstrated by the history for a more restrictive method. So those are my comments. Thank you.
And then the one other, yeah, thank you, John. And
Sure.
The one other comment I had under, and this one's actually a little more important from an LTCO perspective, is the addition. So in the sub 3, or the 3 little I's subsection, and there's a reference to an individual needs to be restricted, such as in, such as in cases of infectious disease, as determined by a health professional. So I'm not aware of any legal allowances for a care facility to restrict the movement of an individual for public health purposes. Now, there may be, the common dining rooms may be shut down. There's, what we've been advocating for since the beginning of COVID is that a facility should strongly recommend to residents, hey, we have an infectious disease in the building, whichever, flu, otherwise, please stay in your room if you can, or if you come out, please wear a mask. These are strong recommendations, public health's recommending it, maybe a healthcare professional, but I'm not aware of a legal ability for the facility and staff at a facility to restrict the movements of an individual and to involuntarily seclude them for public health purposes. So maybe there's some clarification that I need on that, but I'd be very concerned with the way this is written if, and consistent with what we've been advocating for the last 5-6 years now.
Okay.
Yeah,
Go
Fred,
ahead,
I just checked the existing rules and so this thing has gone through so many versions. I'm sorry that the tracking isn't perfect. But the existing sentence in rule stops after health or safety. And then what was added there was some explanatory information to try to explain what that might look like, which when you do that, you always run the risk of explaining too much or too little, and you're better off without it. So that's a fair point, but just to note that the existing rule does say when their presence in the specified area poses a risk to health or safety.
Yeah, and it may be that a resident agrees to
Mhm.
be isolated for infectious disease purposes. I will say, if we're talking about maintenance of an area of a room, well, that is a needed restriction. That is different. So there's some nuance. Anyway, thank you, John.
Okay.
Wonderful. Cool.
Who's
Thank you so much, Fred, and thanks for the clarification there, John. We do have a chat question from Tara. Could you provide insight as to the reason the within hearing distance was removed from the existing guidelines for verbal or emotional abuse?
Yes. So I'm okay. I am all right. So we did not remove it, we just reorganized it. So under A, for the purposes of these rules, includes but is not limited to oral, written, electronic, gesture communication directed at an adult or within their hearing distance. So we didn't remove it, we just did some reorganization. Let's see, does that make sense, Tara? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Tara. Thanks, Kristen. On to you, Nicolette.
So my question is it's on the beginning, it's at the end of page 13, beginning of page 14, and it's talking
Okay.
about community abuse investigations.
Yes.
And under little d, it says receives Medicaid funded services from an enrolled provider. And I'm concerned that maybe having that language in there can be a little confusing, because arguably this is for community abuse investigations, but a facility that has a Medicaid contract and Medicaid residents residing in their facility would arguably be somebody who receives Medicaid funded services from an enrolled provider. And so I'm not quite sure how you fix that. But with that sentence in there, arguably it would include any facility Medicaid provider. Does that make sense? So I don't know how unless you wanted to add something in here that says that
not
is
in
not
a
being
licensed
served
facility.
in a licensed facility setting, or something like that. And then just as an FYI, whatever is decided here, under community abuse investigation, under the definition here, it says receives Medicaid funded services from an enrolled provider. But then in section 1, and I know we're not there yet, but just when we get to section 105 and they reference these same things again, little d is different. It uses different language. It says it still has that regulated provider. And so we'll just want to make sure that it's consistent in both places.
Yeah, and that was something we missed. So thank you for pointing that out, but I'll make sure we include it when we get to that section.
Okay, perfect. And then on page 16 at the bottom where it's talking about informed choice, I understand the freedom of undue influence, but I would just maybe recommend that we add in front of that that the choice is voluntary and made without and free from undue influence. So that it reads, informed choice means an individual has adequate information about available options, the capacity to make the decision, and the choice is voluntary and made without undue influence. So just an addition there, a recommended addition. And then the last thing that I have for definitions, and then I think I'll be done with definitions, is just asking clarification on page 24 under severity 61. There is language that's added in about whether the event's effect or potential effect were significant, serious, or substantial. And I don't know if you're trying to align that with the scope and severity grids that are used in licensed facilities, but I mean, this obviously these rules don't only apply to licensed facilities. And so if we're talking about the potential effect of significant, serious, or substantial, I'm not sure what we're trying to achieve by adding that language. And if we are going to add that language, then we probably need to add some definitions around what is considered significant, what is considered serious, and what is considered substantial, just for clarification.
Okay, thank you for that. And all I will point out in relation to that comment is that is supposed to really support the assessment process that we outlined in 90, which is, I believe, our assessment section. So when you read 90 and that assessment section, do you still have the same concern regarding how we've identified severity? Because it was really meant to support that. So
okay, I'm scrolling down to 90. So why don't I look at 90 while you guys take the next questions, and then if I have
and when
concerns,
we
I can
come
bring
to
it back up. Yeah,
absolutely.
There.
Absolutely. Okay.
Cool. Thank you, Nicolette. On to you, Fred.
Just so I'm not jumping, I just remember seeing something that said, thanks, Tara, we will address this after Fred's comment. Was there a needed, has that already been addressed?
Yes, yeah, we got it.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
No, thanks for checking.
Yeah, I just don't want to jump the line. Another thing that I noticed, I thought I've heard in past rules, rule advisory committee meetings that there was kind of guidance to not especially in definitions, simply to cross-reference statutes. I may be wrong about that. I saw it a couple of times. The one in particular I'm bringing up here, though, is the list of mandatory reporters. Just a strong recommendation, I feel, for me, of listing out the mandatory reporters. I just think that's such a critical aspect of abuse identification in this state. I don't see the harm in making sure that it's still identified in the rule, even though it is in statute as well. It's an opinion that I'm sharing, and thank you.
Thank you, Fred.
All right, you got that pulled up and ready to go, Nicolette?
I'm reading it. I still feel like, I mean, I'm looking at that section 4, and I don't want, maybe we can wait till we jump to that, but I do see what you're talking about, that it is to kind of give guidance around that assessment. But
Yeah.
even when you look at the definition of assessment and them looking at the history and the lifestyle and the functionality and all of that stuff, I mean, it still arguably leaves a lot of gray area around those three words and what they truly mean. And so, you know, I do think that if we're going to use those three languages in there, similar to the scope and severity grid that is used in licensed facilities, it might just be beneficial to add some language around what that means.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so any other comments? Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
I'm
Jump in.
relentless. This is what happens when I'm now reviewing in real time some of these definitions. So the last one, the last definition, even unsubstantiated,
Okay.
where it says, you know, after the investigation that alleged abuse or self-neglect did not occur. That's something that our office has actually bumped up against in my time here, in especially in a care facility setting. What I would share is, you know, for a resident or family members that believe they've been abused, to hear, nope, that did not occur after a DHS investigation is kind of brutal. Even, you know, so if they see unsubstantiated did not occur, rather it's unsubstantiated could not be substantiated, is really the language I would, you know, or something along those lines that I would strongly recommend moving towards, rather than did not occur. Obviously, sometimes it did not occur, but not every time. It's just that it could not reach the level of substantiation.
Kristen, that's a good point, but is that not covered with our inconclusive finding? Isn't an inconclusive, isn't that mean that we don't have the evidence to say if it was sub or unsub? If we unsubstantiate something, we're saying we have the evidence that shows this did not occur. Now, correct me if I'm wrong.
And that is very helpful, Russ, that I did not pick up on, if you already have those distinctions. Thank you.
And again, this is Steph, and I can't raise my hand, but I'm going to go back to what Fred said, because I agree inconclusive shows that you can't make a determination at all. But just because you didn't reach the preponderance of the evidence to prove an allegation does not mean it did not occur. It means that you don't have enough evidence to prove it did occur. And
Okay.
again, like Fred says, that is something that's really, we hear that a lot in our office, that something happened. It just wasn't, I guess, substantiated. It doesn't mean that nothing occurred.
We didn't meet our burden of proof.
And maybe to say that would be a better way to say it, that you didn't meet the preponderance, not that it didn't occur.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, all good feedback. Definitely. Okay, thank you. All right. Any final comments? Any of the RAC members want to share on definitions before we move on to authority and responsibility? Okay. All right, I'm gonna go back to my presentation here. So we're gonna move past definitions. And that takes us to authority and responsibility under 10. I won't pull up the rules unless we have questions or comments. Yeah, Nicolette?
So I just have a question under section 7, the APS eligible adults who receive Medicaid services. I noticed that you've kind of changed where the definition of critical incidents in as far as including abuse. And I know, I'm assuming maybe that this has to do with the CMS Medicaid access rules and the minimum federal standards defining critical incident. But I just was wondering if that's why this was changed or why there was that change.
Where are you at?
I'm sorry, number 7.
7, got it, right here.
Yeah, right there.
APS.
Where it was just given as an example, now it's changed to including that neglect and exploitation is removed out. And I'm just curious if that was a change due to the Medicaid access rule changes, the CMS Medicaid access rule changes, or why that was changed.
Okay, I'm gonna let John cover just in case, but my recollection is that we put in including abuse instead of providing the example of abuse, neglect, and exploitation.
Yeah, that was really just kind of a
Okay.
technical fix because abuse in Oregon includes neglect and
Neglect.
exploitation. So
Yeah.
it was just use one word instead of three to make it clear that it's all in the same bucket. That was really the only change there.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
No problem. Okay, any other
we got,
questions? Oh,
yeah, we
sorry.
got one from Steph.
Yes,
Oh,
and again, I apologize. I keep trying to raise my hand and it doesn't work. My comment is on page 27, and I just
Okay.
want to point out that it's number 4, says room and board situations that are certified, and actually room and boards are registered with ODHS, not certified. And my second question with that, and that's in the rule. My second question is room and boards are supposed to be registered with DHS, but there are also some counties that do registration. So is this going to preclude APS from investigating in a room and board that is only registered with the county because they don't know that they have to register for DHS with DHS also?
I don't think it would preclude that, Steph. I just think, this is saying, yes, we get some authority from the ones that are registered with the state, but if they're
Okay.
not, we would still, investigate under our good old community authority and see what we could do.
Okay, thank you, John.
thank you, John. Okay, anyone else would like to comment on authority and responsibility before we move on to eligibility? Okay. So next for your review is going to be eligibility 0015. Go ahead, Nicolette.
So under number 4 on the kind of in the middle of page 29.
Oh yes, let me go back. Okay.
It talks about right there, yeah, separate APS intakes, investigations, and protective services. And I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. Is this, I guess I'm looking at like an example of, let's see, like a med diversion. Let's say a medication diversion occurs in a facility setting and it's one person that is conducting this abuse, and maybe that medication diversion affects 5 different residents. Is this now that there will be 5 separate APS investigations specific to each of those residents, and 5 different reports will be completed, and arguably 5 different instances of abuse would be put on the facility, the Department of Human Services website? And is that what the intent of this is?
So the intent of this language, since our centralized abuse management system was created, we had one alleged victim per intake. So screening intake. So what this says, and a med diversion, that is a good example. And yes, it really is going to depend on the information we have at screening, But if the allegation, what is being said is that we have multiple alleged victims that may have suffered harm or was at risk of serious harm based upon these medication diversions, then we would create an intake. And this is not a new practice. This is essentially a policy that is being incorporated into rule. So what you would see is you would see an intake where we have the alleged victim, we're assessing responsibility of the facility, and then potentially adding any alleged perpetrator that may have diverted the meds. So we will look at each AV. However, the screening is based upon multiple steps. Eligibility, if what was reported is true, would constitute abuse under our rules, then it would be one intake per victim.
Okay, I'm not sure that that's the current practice of having a separate, and maybe Kristen, maybe this is just how those individual intake forms then translate to the deficiency that is given to the facility. Maybe the deficiency itself is only one deficiency or one citation, even though there might be multiple separate APS intakes. Maybe that's the disconnect.
Absolutely, because our rules aren't going to speak to any safety oversight, quality assurance process. And so really what you're talking about is how they will assign or assess civil penalty based on our investigation and findings. So you are correct. SOQ really has the authority to assess those based upon their rules, not ours, because the civil penalty process isn't part of our OAR. And I may be butchering this. John, do you think, is there something that I missed that I feel like I'm butchering it a bit?
No, I think you're doing good. You just caught me having a little snack break.
Oh, okay. You're welcome. Sorry about that.
I think you're good. That's existing practice, and it's just that an abuse investigation involves an individual, and the investigation is for that individual and has to reach a conclusion for that person. APS doesn't really do systematic investigations. Those are more regulatory. So there are, I think, sometimes, and not every resident who is reported as having had a med error may have met the APS requirement for risk of serious harm.
Correct.
So sometimes there may be 5 people reported, but only 1 gets assigned and investigated for APS because of the seriousness of that particular situation. So yeah, it's complicated with SOQ. I don't think we have anyone from SOQ here today to talk about that, but that is our current practice, and how our current system is set up is for each allegation to involve 1 alleged victim, even in facility cases.
And I will point out, Nicolette, that it is a critical nuance from our data perspective. Like it's important to capture these assessments based on a single alleged victim, because it allows us to better track data that represents the impact of abuse on individuals instead of grouping them together in one case. So it does have a correlation to just the overall integrity of our data we collect too. So.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yes. All right, any other questions or comments on eligibility before we move on to reporting?
Just a quick question for you, Kristen. This is Susanna.
Yes.
I was inspired by John affirming that snack break. We are getting close to the halfway
Okay.
point of our time
Yeah.
together. This might be a good point for our 20-minute break, if that sounds good to everyone. All
Okay.
right.
Yeah, we'll put in chat when you can return. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks. We will see you all in 20. We'll pick up at 2:41. Thank you.
Okay, it's 2:41. Welcome back, everyone. All right. We will move on to our next section. Okay, this is section 0020, reporting of abuse and self-neglect. I will turn it over to RAC members and feel free to share your comments. Hopefully you're all back.
I don't know if Susanna is back and is kind of doing the calling people out, but
oh, yeah, I don't see hands. Is someone have a hand?
Yep, Nicolette
Oh.
is ready to go, and I appreciate how you are going to
Okay.
moderate for me. Thank you.
Thank
you, Nicolette.
Yeah.
The question that I had, or the concern that I had, was on page 30, and it's number 5.
Okay.
And there is a lot of additional language that was added about mandatory reporters, the duty to report 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's always been in the rules, but there's been some additional language that states on or off the mandatory reporters work hours. And I guess I'm just a little bit concerned about that. Mostly because you're running into wage and labor rules and laws and things like that. And that kind of is towing the line, where before, when it was, it's your duty to report 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Like that was, it was in there, but now we're getting really prescriptive around their, even outside of the mandatory work hours. And I think you run into some wage and labor law issues there that I think we might want to be careful about. I know, for example, in the federal rules, they basically state that the mandatory reporter duties refer to any encounters in the course of their professional duty. And so I guess my request is maybe that we remove that additional mandatory reporter work hours, because I do think that that goes against some wage and labor law potential concerns. And maybe keeping it a little bit more vague with the report 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then in that same paragraph under 5A, there was some wordsmithing, which I think is great, but I think on that second sentence of 5A, we need to make sure that that also says reasonable cause to believe.
Okay, so a mandatory reporter must report if they come into contact with an older adult in any setting and have reasonable cause to believe the older adult has suffered abuse.
Yes. That's in the first sentence, and I think that's fine. But in that
Okay.
second sentence where it says also they must report if they come into contact with any person or entity who has abused an older adult, same thing.
And
I think that
okay.
reasonable cause to believe needs to be added to that second line as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And then under D, I'm just curious why the removal of the word any.
In D, anyone making an elder abuse. Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it said immunity from any civil or criminal liability. I'm just curious why there was a decision to remove the word any.
Probably because we can only speak to the immunity that's provided under the statute for good faith. And by saying any civil or criminal action, it kind of opens it to broader than that. That would be what I would explain that change as. Because really when you're making that report, so when that report is made in good faith, the statute provides you immunity. So, and it's immunity from civil or criminal liability. By putting any, we don't want to imply that there's other immunities under other statutes that may apply when we're speaking about the mandatory reporting one. But we'll definitely.
Okay. Well, I would just like to say on the record that we're making a recommendation to put that any back in.
Okay.
So thank you.
Perfect. Yes. All right, Fred, go ahead.
Just to Nicola's and OHCA's point, I think the any is in statute. If I'm understanding what she's looking at specifically,
Okay.
the 124.075, anyone participating in good faith making a report of elder abuse, so on and so on, shall have immunity from any criminal or civil liability that might otherwise be incurred. Anyway, if that's what
Okay.
she was referring to, it is in statute. So
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Angela, you're up.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you, Susanna. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Just circling back to 5, yeah, 5A and B, it appears that last sentence in A might be repeated in B, unless I'm misunderstanding. Where it says also they must report, and then if you look at B, it repeats that sentence.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you got that. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, did you have anything else, Angela?
No, that was it. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else would like to comment on this section before we move on to the next one? Okay, I'm going to keep my rules up. Oh, no, just kidding. I'm not going to. All right, next we're going to look at confidentiality and information sharing. Okay, so we're skipping over multi MDTs just because there was no substantive changes made. Just as an FYI, if you have questions, just let me know. Alice, you want to get us started on comments for this section?
Yes. Okay,
Okay.
sorry. I have a couple screens up with my notes.
I'm super patient, don't worry.
Okay, I'm just wondering,
Mhm.
so the union represents home care workers, and I'm wondering if in order to represent them during a hearing, if they need to be included in the list of who can access reports or records, if they are a represented worker wanting our representation.
Okay. Off the top of my head, our confidentiality laws are pretty strict. We can definitely take that comment and see if it's allowable.
Okay.
My first impression would be that it wouldn't, but we will definitely consider that comment and go from there.
Okay.
The other thing that I will say is that with due process, you know, there are processes that are related that in which there's discovery. And so there's lots of rules surrounding when and when we can't. But that's definitely one we'll note. Thank you. Okay, Susanna, I have lost track, so I'll let
All
you.
good. We are on to Steph, who
Steph,
now
okay.
has that hand raise working. Glad to see it.
I found it. Thank you. Sorry for that. So this
Okay.
is Steph with the Ombudsman's Office again. So I have a question about this section because just my understanding is APS doesn't release reports. So who is the intended audience for this information?
So it's really supposed to provide an understanding for the public as well. And so there are exceptions to the law related to, you know, public safety or protective services. So essentially, this language represents information that we had in policy that's being absorbed into rule. And
Okay.
so it's supposed to provide some transparency to the public about when we will release information and what information is released, although it is confidential.
Okay. So number 3, I really have a huge concern with this, that
Okay.
And the change with the policy or into the rule where you're not going to acknowledge to a person that you're going to open an investigation. I think that's a huge disservice to the public for many reasons, and partially because if someone refers to APS and you're not going to investigate, there's other entities that can do interventions to help make a person safe. And I know that may or may not have to do with your rules, but I think it may be a consideration for internal policy. We do not get involved if APS is involved. We're not a finding of fact agency. However, we do put in interventions and look out for safety and work with facilities often when APS doesn't investigate. But we need to know in order to do that. And so this, sorry.
No. You go ahead and finish. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And just again, I think that puts us at the Ombudsman's Office and other offices at a huge disadvantage, and I think it can be harmful to a victim.
Understood. John and I, and Kristen too, we have met with DOJ. We had always practiced, and I'll give you and then there's exceptions in the rules that I'm sure Kristen will go over more, but just to give you a brief background of why this is happening now. We met with DOJ just a little over a month ago, and what we were actually doing is we were talking with them about the new administration of community living federal requirements that were coming down, and one of those requirements is that you cannot reporter information and alleged victim information is both confidential, so we can't share reporter information with the alleged victim without the reporter's consent. We cannot share any information with the reporter without the alleged victim's consent. Now, that's the way the federal regs were written. So we assumed by our practice, the way that we had always been, the way this had always been interpreted up until now, that we were going to be out of compliance with that. So we were shocked whenever DOJ came back to us and said, no, you should not be releasing reporter information without the alleged victim's consent. And then they went further to say, and Kristen and John can jump in and explain some of the exceptions, because there are definitely exceptions to that. But in general, we must now, according to DOJ, and we ran that by DHS leadership as well to make sure that and of course, DHS leadership is like, hey, we've got to follow statute. If DOJ is telling us the statute does not back this up, we certainly do not want to be in violation of our Oregon state statutes. That does not mean that we won't at some point try to get a legislative proposal like child welfare did a few years ago that would really spell out the differences of sharing some of that information with certain reporters. Now, according to DOJ, there are already exceptions to where there is information and certain entities. And by course of the investigation, that there will be things shared. But in general, they advised us to make that statement that we've made here, and that is the way that is going to be. Now, I will, Kristen, if you and John want to say anything about any of the exceptions in the conversations that you had with DOJ after the one I was involved with, please.
I'll just jump in, Kristen. Yes, I think this change is going to put a spotlight back on the exceptions, where we do have the ability to share confidential information with community partners who are able to provide protective services to the alleged victim, including LTCO. So if the reporter's not going to know, well, I guess I need to call the ombudsman. This is going to put the onus on APS to be very diligent in cross-reporting things that are closed at intake or that are assigned, but where a referral and information sharing with a community partner is appropriate and covered by an exception.
Okay, thank you. So moving on, my next section, though, I wanted to point out was under number 5B, and I think it's B, no, hold on. It's about this section where, let me look at my notes. Page 34, that'll help me.
Okay, so the part
And-
about reasonably necessary?
I think it might be reasonably necessary. Yeah. So my question is, when we talk to people, they say, well, I asked for information, but I didn't get what I asked for. And I'm bringing this up because, and I think this might be not necessarily a rule thing, but a training thing, because people don't know. It says you're only going to release the necessary, oh, it's the next section, C, only going to get the redacted APS report if they don't know what they're asking for. So I'm hoping that someone's going to provide some education to these people that are asking for information so that they are able to get the information. We often intervene because someone says, well, I asked for, A, B, or C, I never received it, and they didn't because they didn't ask for it, but they don't know what to ask for. I hope that makes sense. So again, I think I might be asking for something for training for APS or whomever's releasing these documents. But I think, again, it does disservice to the public who wants information, doesn't know what to ask for, so they don't get what they want.
Okay. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steph. I saw Fred next.
Yeah, thank you. And so within this confidentiality section, and I haven't evaluated yet how this would need to be incorporated. But as far as the ability for long-term care ombudsman to receive abuse reports, it's different than what is reflected here. I came to this realization from a recent reevaluation of our ombudsman statutes. So just to put it on your radar, and then want to make sure that we have it addressed here properly, is within statutory section 441.408 subsection 2. There is clarification there. Actually, I'm looking at make sure I'm looking at that right. Yeah, so that, it's sub 2A, but there's clarification there that the ombudsman, shall have access to various reports, including reports of resident abuse made pursuant to RS 124.050, and then the nursing facility abuse section as well. That was a clarification made in statute in 2017, if we need to chat about that. But it is probably more under what you have as a category of full disclosure section rather than limited disclosure section. I know there is still the ombudsman reference in the 124 chapter as referenced here under the limited disclosure. So we may need to have some conversations about that, or you with your DOJ attorney, so we can get it right.
Okay, thank you, Fred. Did you have any other comments before we move on to the next person? Okay.
All right, up to you, L'Oreal. Thank you.
Hi, I'm confused. We need to back up to page 33
Okay.
and back to when Alice was speaking, specifically regarding like the union involvement. I'm gonna write this amendment down to, let's see, 0200030. Okay, if we're having to get adult protection services involved, the first thing the providers are told to do is to obviously call the case manager, who takes often 48 hours or longer to even respond. But then they're also supposed to call the union, where the union lets then report that there may be an APS investigation, where the union is telling the providers that yes, you can cooperate with APS, but if you're not comfortable doing that, you very politely tell APS that we will gladly cooperate when our union representative is with me.
Uh-huh.
So the union needs to have access to the APS reports if you're going to expect a provider to be represented by the union. So I got confused as to why that information, or why the union wouldn't be included in the confidentiality.
Yeah, that's a good question, L'Oreal. And I think that's something that the policy team will have to talk about is where does the union and the statutes, I'm assuming the statutes that are part and parcel to union involvement, does that overarch? Is that overarching, or does that or does that take the place of? I'm trying to think of the word, of a union employee's burden under Oregon state statutes to report abuse, neglect, or exploitation. So I think that opens up a very good line of conversation that we can certainly we'll have to talk about that. I think
Yeah.
you make an excellent point. Thank you.
No, thank you.
The one thing that I will point out, L'Oreal, is that typically when we're talking about processes that are occurring before we've even maybe finished an investigation in which we have a report. So, for example, if we have an alleged perpetrator and our interviews are voluntary, so an individual, can refuse to participate. They can also ask to have their union present. So, at that point in the investigation, even the information that the alleged perpetrator has is limited because it's a current active investigation. So we are definitely going to provide disclosure or notice to that AP that they are subject to an investigation, and we're going to provide them the minimal information to know what it is that's under investigation. So, but again, all of your comments are definitely going to be considered and are on point. I just mainly wanted to point out that usually at this point in the process, there may not, that we're not even going to have a report because we're still in that active investigation. So, but your comments are noted, like Russ said, good points. Thank you.
All right. Well, I see Alice's hand up, so maybe she'll add on to this, because that's standard operating procedure. You can wait for your union rep to be present.
Yep, absolutely. But it is also upon that person to exercise those rights. So that's important to remember. All right, who was next, Susanna?
We are on to Fred, and then we'll talk to Alice.
Well, maybe take Alice since you're on the topic of union, assuming that she
Okay.
might have something on that. I can wait.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. I had a couple follow-up points I wanted to make to what L'Oreal was saying. And really what is like the most important thing that I wanted to communicate in the RAC is around that notice, that workers have the right to representation during the investigation, because And in my notes, I was thinking maybe this should be, you know, some in a different chapter, but it is a problem that we see at the union where workers don't know that they are entitled to representation until after there's a substantiated abuse finding, and then they come to the union wanting representation, and it's can be really like, you know, they've missed out on the opportunity to have that representation during the investigation, which they do have a right to that. So I just wanted to say, like, it is really important that that people are informed that if they're represented by a union, that they do have that right early and not finding it out later, because that's what's really hard at the union when we get a call and we realize we could have helped someone, and now we have to go and you know, they'll have like a contested case, or it's a lot more process for them. It's a lot harder for us to help them. So making sure that that notice is given to workers, you know, before the interview is important.
Thank you for that. Definitely. All right.
Okay.
Fred, I think you're next.
Yeah, the item I added is brief, is just at the bottom of page 35. It looks like you're adding a, for example, disability rights Oregon in that subsection at the bottom of the page. What is it? It's proposed subsection J. Anyway, I don't know if you need the for example. Disability rights Oregon is that protection and advocacy system. I've never understood why the statute references in that way. You might want to check with DRO just to make sure it's right. Unless there's something new is developed that I'm not aware of from the last 15 years. I'm pretty sure that 192.517 just basically is DRO. So
Sorry about that. Okay,
well, I
thank
don't
you
care. I'm just sharing.
very much. No, I messed up my sharing. So, all right. Thank you, Fred, for pointing that out. Okay.
Alice, did you have some follow-up?
No, sorry, I just didn't lower my hand.
Okay, no worries. Just wanted to make sure we got everything. Thank you.
Okay. If there's no other comments for confidentiality and information sharing, we'll move on to services provided. Just give you another minute to speak up. All right. So that brings us to services, section 0040. Open it up to the RAC members. Anything you would like to see or discuss? Okay. We will move on to our next section, which is our brand new section on jurisdiction. The proposed section number is 0055. I will kind of just open up the conversation on this. When we were incorporating our existing policies into rule, this section was really created to house all of the information related to what we have jurisdiction over and what we don't. The biggest thing that we did was add information regarding our jurisdiction or lack thereof on travel land, as an example. Any questions or comments RAC members want to put forth? Fred, go ahead and get us started.
Yeah, and I'm saying this knowing that you have, and maybe I can even just couch it in how you've identified LTCO, you know, at least staff as individuals that would not be investigated for a violation of abuse against, at least under these rules, older adult person with disability. I'm not aware of that legal barrier, and I'll share. This is something I've long been frustrated with, going back 15 plus 20 years now, 17, 18 years, however long I've been in the system, where I understand like APS won't investigate a doctor or, a guardianship case, a guardian, thinking that that's under court jurisdiction, we'll let the court handle it. I think there needs to be, in my opinion, more nuance of when APS would investigate and when they may not investigate, rather than just creating, this line of saying anybody on the other side of the line, we're not going to investigate. So even a long-term care ombudsman staff, even myself, there's that potential of we've done something that falls under, say, verbal abuse, of a resident. I think, in general, as state staff, there's HR policies, personnel investigations that would occur, but I think, unless I'm missing something within the abuse statute, I don't think there's a line that says, this type of employee would not be investigated. So, maybe there is restrictions on investigating tribal members. I understand that. Maybe federal agencies, I don't know. But anyway, I just think that this most likely needs to be more nuanced than what I'm reading here.
Okay, so what we did in this section was identify the professional conduct of staff while working in their official capacity. And the reason for that is under the onus that these individuals would fall under another authority based upon their conduct in that official position. Now, if, let's say, Fred, the long-term care ombudsman, was to verbally and emotionally abuse someone on his off time, that would be conduct, that didn't occur under your professional capacity or your official capacity of your position. So that's how it was intended, but definitely have your comments on the record and they'll be considered.
And I appreciate, clarifying that nuance that you have already built into. I mean, it does to take a step towards what I was indicating as well.
Yeah.
Just to share, it was a volunteer certified ombudsman, not a staff ombudsman that was alleged to have verbally abused a resident, and it was this resident situation, and he yelled at another resident in trying to protect a second resident, and it was inappropriate. It fell within an APS investigatory authority. I would contend, even if that was a staff person, say, maybe it's just LTCO and I'm reflecting, kind of opening that door. But, when I look at medical professionals, I think that there's still that potential for abuse to occur, even in a professional conduct that crosses the line of statutory abuse. So I just, maybe it's more limiting what's investigated and then referring out to a professional body, or say it's another state employee like the public guardian or LTCO, being referred to, HR or something along those lines. But
And also kind of recognizing that we know that there are regulatory boards and entities that oversee some of these professions, like doctors and nurses and attorneys. And so it's also kind of, acknowledging that there may be a more appropriate authority to look at the conduct of someone that was in their official capacity. But definitely good comments to consider. Thank you.
Well, and just to feed off of that, I mean, but those professional entities may not investigate abuse. They'll look at ethical misconduct in different ways. So anyway.
Yeah, very true. Thank you for pointing that out. All right.
Steph?
Oh, sorry.
My question goes along the lines of what you just said. So number 6, APS does not investigate conduct of licensed or certified professionals. And I see you have the caveat unless. But my question is, we have nurses that work in and RNs, LPNs that work in facilities. They're licensed, yet they may be the person that was abusive. I guess there's a handful of licensed entities that are employed by facilities and they're committing the abuse in a facility. So are you saying you would not be investigating them?
No, we're not saying that.
Okay,
So
that's kind of what this says.
okay.
Well, I think A is intended to cover that if they're working in their professional capacity while being paid by or through the department or the authority to serve APS eligible consumers, which covers all clients being paid for or residing in licensed, maybe we need to get that in there, licensed facilities.
Yeah.
Or while residing in a licensed facility.
I think that's the language right there. Thank you. Thank you, John, for clarifying that, because I think I read that and I don't think I got to where you just pointed out.
I think that's a great comment. We'll expand on that to make that clearer. Thank you.
And I think what also threw me was just the example down below in B about the off-duty licensed nurses. The example made me think, what about, the licensed professionals on duty? But thank you very much.
Got it. Good comment. Thank you. Thank you for jumping in, John. Do we have any others, Susanna? I'm not seeing anything.
No hands and no comments.
All right. Give you all one more chance to speak up before we move on to the next section, which is intakes and screening. Yeah.
Raising my hand, just jumping in. I'm just making sure there used to be, I'm trying to make sure in this language. So scenario, I know we have at least one residential care facility that's on tribal land. There used to be 2 or 3 adult foster care homes on tribal lands. Is this excluding investigations of those facilities of abuse cases? So I just want to throw that out there. You guys can take it into for consideration. I hadn't evaluated that yet myself.
Yeah, we did include the tribes as an entity in which we would not investigate under their official capacity. So we'll definitely add that to the notes to consider. Thank you. Okay, I am going to, our next section's intakes and screening, and I'm going to start us out. I'm going to share my rules and provide you, well, I already did. I provided you the language that we added since you've received these rules. So that's under the intakes and screening section. So this is your opportunity to provide comment on that section, including these additions, which I have up here. So I'll just open it up to RAC members. Okay, Nicolette.
So my question is on page 49, and it's under 7F. And it's talking about APS workers notifying the reporter of screening decisions no later than the end of the next business day. But in F, it says that APS workers must not notify APD licensed facilities of the screening decision when facilities self-report incidents to APS.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, is that because those APS reports are going to the corrective action coordinator at SOQ, or what is the rationale that the self-report incidents that come from a facility, that information is not shared with them, the screening decision?
Well, I will start out by saying that we are taking out the entire section 7 in its entirety, which includes that portion. That is related to the fact that it was determined we don't have statutory authority to provide the reporter of the outcome of the screening decision.
Okay, so all of section 7 is being removed.
all of section 7
Okay, thank you.
being taken out. So
Okay.
we're not going to tell any, our rules are being updated so that we protect the confidentiality surrounding these reports. And so reporters will not be included in receiving the outcome notification.
Okay.
So yes, we deleted F right here. And so other notifications and referrals will get renumbered to 7.
Okay.
And I'll send these out to you afterwards, and we'll have them up on the RAC page too for you to access. So did you have anything else, Nicolette, other than that section that you wanted to address?
Not in that section. No, thank you.
Okay.
All right, Steph, you're up.
So thinking that through, if the resident themselves is the reporter, do they get that information? Because there would be implied consent or consent at that point.
Yeah, so the alleged victim is able to consent for that disclosure.
Okay. Will there be any rules around notification to them? Because in practice, most people are not notified at the time of screening.
That is something I don't have an answer for, but we will note that for consideration, definitely.
Thank you.
Fred?
And I'm asking this, and you've probably said it already, and just trying to get clarification because it feels important here. And I'm trying to read and listen at the same time frequently here.
All good.
What are, somebody reporting an allegation of abuse? Are they not going to be even notified of the screening decision then, of whether it's screened in or screened out?
Correct. They
And
will
that's-
not be notified without TAV's consent.
Oh, without the AV's consent.
So yeah, and
Okay,
so
that helps. Thank you.
okay. Okay, good.
That's the clarification I think is very helpful. It's still a little potentially problematic. I wonder if it's a legislative change. I'm assuming this because you don't feel the statute authorizes it. In our LTCO world, we take all, from residents, we take all direction from them on something like that too.
Yeah.
But for public coordination, if somebody's making an allegation, say a mandatory reporter, or even in a professional capacity, it seems like there's some scenarios where they should be notified whether it's been screened in by a state investigative body. So, at a
Yeah.
anyway, we can work on that though. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and part of what Rush shared, with the federal regulations, they don't allow this either. However, there are still parameters within the statute and rule that allow for disclosure when there's a protective services nexus or need. So there will be nuances to this as we work through it. So thank you for the comments. Any other comments on the intake and screening sections? So I'll just kind of confirm that the changes that we are proposing that weren't in your agenda was the removal of 3, which essentially is we're not providing screening decisions or the intake number. And then we're also deleting the addition of 7, which spoke to the notification and the documentation. So we're removing that, renumbering, and that is it for our screening section. Does anybody want to comment before I move on to the next one? Okay. So that brings us to our law enforcement notification and collaboration. This section, we made minimal changes, just really kind of more so surrounding the collaboration and the fact that a criminal investigation does not take the place of an APS abuse investigation. I'll open it up to RAC members for any comments. Okay, we have about 30 minutes left, which is not much time. So we'll keep moving through here. Didn't hear anything for your law enforcement notification and collaboration. So I will move to 0090 on assessment. Anything you want to put on the record for this section? Yeah, Natalie?
Thanks, Kristen. And this is my first RAC. I'm definitely not as familiar as many on the call. I wanted to learn more. So clarification, with the summary of the changes for this section, it says, you know, in the 7-page document, summary of updates, that APS workers will use detailed interviews and observations and not clinical tools. And I was, if that's a statutory thing, I just didn't know if there clinical tools, if there's physical abuse or things like that. So I didn't see that spelled out in the actual document unless I missed it.
Okay, so when you're talking about like physical abuse, are you referring to like the use of rulers and such to document injuries?
Well, things that might have a mark on the body or something that clinical tools would help document rather than interviewing. Okay,
perfect. Yeah, and just to get that clarity on the record for when we review this. You know, at the top of my head, it does seem as though it would be information that we would probably put in a manual, but I don't really have any additional comments on that for you. I apologize.
Okay. That sounds good. I mean, I'm guessing that the investigator might not have the tools to do those, so, or the skills, or yeah.
Correct. And I think we are just differentiating between how we may come to a determination versus someone else in a medical field based upon the scope and services of our rules and our authority under that.
And very quickly, some of this also has to do with like capacity and things, capacity assessments. There's a lot of other states in adult protective services that they are responsible for assessing capacity. So they have various tools, assessment tools that they utilize. Oregon our statute is really clear on how we determine those things is through actual professionals that specialize in that. And then we use our own eyes, ears, you know, what our senses, what we see, what we smell, what we hear. Now that isn't to say that we can't use a ruler or a body chart to show where the bruises were, but I believe, and I could be wrong, that what is really brought out here more is those professional assessment tools used by people that are trained to use them, and we don't do that in the same way as some other APS agencies do across the country.
Perfect. Thank you, Russ.
Great. Thank you both for the explanation.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, anything else before we move to intervention? This section was renumbered. Let's see here. Okay. Let me pull it up here and see what I have. Oh, 95. Okay. Does anyone have any comments that they want to put on the record for 0095 intervention? Fred, I'll pull up the rules here for you.
Well, nothing specific on the rules
Okay.
here, just throwing this out there for Russ in particular of,
Yeah.
this is an area, this section here is what I would consider a prime target for what I think we as a state need to be providing from adult protective services in nursing facility settings and without interfering with survey and CMS direction. So just throwing that out there on your radar. I love what I'm reading here. I mean, this
Yeah.
is a protective service function I think we as a state need to be providing in these settings. So
Yeah, Fred, and we've talked about that. It seems like over the last 20 years, not just in Oregon, but APS agencies across the country have really moved into more of an investigatory focused body and less of a protection, prevention, intervention model. And what we're trying to do, not just in Oregon, but all across the country through National Adult Protective Service Association's big initiative with them as well, is to try to move that needle back to where, yes, the investigation is definitely a part of protective services, but it's not the end all be all. We must intervene, must do risk management, we must train prevention, we must train protection, and we must be able to provide those things by referring to the proper services and not ending it there, but then to take it a step further and verify that those services that we referred got delivered. So yeah, you're right on course with where we're trying to head with this.
yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Anybody else would like to put comments on the record before we move on? Okay, so I'm going to move us to the community section. This is 0100. First, before I open it up to RAC members, I just want to identify some changes we made since this was issued. I apologize here, 10A. So you will see we've removed from the final review process that the reporter, we've removed the reporter. So the alleged victim can receive the outcome. All right, Alice.
Hi, thanks.
Started?
Yeah, and I think this is, to me, this is where it makes sense to have clarifying, to have more direction around informing the alleged perpetrator that they have a right to representation.
Okay.
And I want to just like make sure that you understand, we see this problem a lot where workers lose their provider number after an abuse substantiation, and there's really nothing we can do for them. And
I know.
it is really, then they can lose the ability to work in long-term care, in this state. So it is really a big deal, people losing their jobs and their ability to support themselves. So just wanted to communicate that and ask that we could find a place where it's part of the procedure. The expectation is that notifying represented workers that they can have representation through the investigation.
Okay. We will put that on the record. Anyone else? Steph?
I'm going back to the notification piece again as I am thinking more and more about that since that's new. Has there been consideration that a victim that doesn't have capacity, or even a victim with capacity, their legal guardian, their legal decision maker can ask for the results of the investigation, or I guess just knowing if there is an investigation, we do deal with a lot of people who do have legal decision makers that are not able to ask themselves and make those decisions. And
Yeah,
I would
that's a good
guess
point.
that ACL covers that somewhere in their materials.
Thank you for bringing that up, Steph.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, so that takes us to the facility section. We're skipping over the community due process because that section wasn't reviewed and updates weren't made. So under the facility investigation, I just want to point out or remind you again that we're removing the leftover old piece related to licensing complaints, which allowed the reporter or the individual company the investigator. So we're pulling that out. Any other questions? I'm going to let you call Susanna because I don't know who came up
You
first.
got it. Nicolette's up first.
So I just wanted to, I know there were no changes made to 105, but I just want to again say for the record that 1D needs to be consistent with the definition section. And so if who receives Medicaid funded services from a regulated provider that does not reside in an APD licensed facility, and then making sure that it is the same from the definition to here, because in the definition it says enrolled provider and down here it says regulated provider. So I just, I know we skipped over that section, but I just wanted to make sure that we had that on the record.
And now that I see it, I will tell you that we have that noted to update when that section does get updated. So thank you for that.
Okay. And then my my other question is on number 10.
Okay.
And unless I'm missing something, there were in the rules required elements of the preliminary report, and those have all been removed, and I'm requesting that those required elements be added back in to the preliminary report. And then I also had just a question around the timeline. So we have like this timeline of 60 business days for APS to complete the investigative activities, and then the notification. And as I'm saying this out loud, I'm realizing it might not be APS, it might need to be SOQ, but on number 10, it says, upon receipt of the preliminary report from the local office in CAM, SOQ will review the report, provide notification to providers or individuals of the outcome. And there's no timeline there. And I think that's problematic. And I get that this is SOQ that's providing the notification, but I do think there needs to be some accountability in rule around after that investigation is completed. Like you're putting this recommendation, or not recommendation, in rule that we will complete it within 60 days, but then there's nothing in there that says when that notification will occur. And we're running into scenarios now where those notifications don't occur for like 6 months, 7 months sometimes, which at that point really creates, I think, even more of an unsafe situation. And so I don't know what that would look like, but I would like to see some type of a clear timeline around that notification to the providers or the individuals of that outcome.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely note that.
And that's all for that section from me.
All right. Thank you, Nicolette.
Right on. On to you, Fred.
Just regarding that proposed deletion of the reporter may accompany the investigator.
Yeah.
So that's ORS 441.690. I don't know if you're aware of that or not. It's the way it's written though. I don't know. I mean, it's rooted in 1981. So if you haven't had that conversation with DOJ yet, you might want to see if it still applies.
Well, which
sounds
we
like you're
did,
familiar with. What's that?
Well, we did, and we confirmed that it doesn't apply
Okay, perfect.
based
Okay.
upon primarily the language of a complaint. So,
Okay.
But
As long
yeah.
as you checked on it, that's good. I was just throwing it out there. It's a quirky statute rooted
Very
in time
quirky.
ago. Yeah, okay.
Okay, any other comments on our facility section? Okay, let me get back to so we went through community and facility. Now we are up to admin closure. Really, our remaining sections got very little updates to them. More reorganization, but RAC members, feel free to speak up if you have any questions or comments about administrative closure under 0121. Okay. We'll move to, so that wraps up our rule comments by section. So my intent now is to move into our fiscal and equity impact statements. Are there any questions from REC members before we move on to that? Okay, nice job, everyone. A lot of work. Okay, so what I sent out for your fiscal impact statement and your equity impact statement have not changed from the agenda. So essentially what we'll be confirming or discussing is that RAC members didn't see any other impact that we may not have identified when it comes to statement of cost compliance and effect on small businesses. So I'll open it up to you on anything that you feel like we missed in there that we should be adding. All right. Okay, so next I will move to our equity impact statement. So we provided you information on what we did to ensure that we're providing transparent access to our processes, to Oregonians. Any questions or comments that you would want on the record for our equity impact statement? Okay, moving on. Now, this is regarding the temporary rule. So this is in regards to all the changes that we've reviewed related to the notification that we provide reporters. So based upon the lack of statutory authority for this process, we are going to move forward with a temporary OAR that will amend these requirements. So on your screen here, I also have a copy of the temp rule if you'd like to see it as well, but I did identify for you under 0060, it's number 8. We're going to delete that one in its entirety. So, and it's shown here on the screen. And then under the community section, we're deleting the reporter out of 7, which was similar to what you identified or just reviewed in our draft rule. Last but not least, under the facility section, we're just removing that part about allowing a reporter to go out with the investigator. So as I shared before, this was ambiguity that we found during this rule update. Providing confidential information to individuals that report abuse to APS, such as screening decisions and investigative outcomes, without the consent of the individual alleged to have been abused, is outside of our statutory authority, which is why we are updating this process. So this really is your opportunity to provide any last minute comments or anything comments you want considered as we move forward with this temporary rule. Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
And just on that subsection 8 again, one last follow up, because you had mentioned that if the AV approves sharing with the reporter, then at least the screening decision can be. Is that actually documented somewhere? And in particular, I'm thinking direction to local APS offices, especially AAAs. Do they know to check with the AV? Do you want us to notify the person who made this complaint?
Yeah.
And if not, I might recommend adding that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, part of this big rule rewrite will also include the adoption of a new APS manual, which those types of topics will live in that manual, which these rules acknowledge. So good point. Thank you, Fred. All right. Anyone else like to share some comments on these before we move on? Okay, I just want to let you know, you can stay up to date on the progress of the temporary rule on our APD RAC page and our APD OAR page, which I know Susanna will add those links in the chat for you all. So be sure to check out those resources. At this point, we are wrapping up our presentation. I just want to give RAC members one more opportunity to put any comments on the record before we finish up. All right, so we only have about 8 minutes left to this meeting. So I know we didn't get, there's not a lot of time for other participants to share information. I do want to let you all know that we are going to leave the window open for written comments to be submitted to me through close of business on February 10th. So I'll go ahead and open it up if there's participants on the line that would like to put some comments on the record in the short amount of time we have left, knowing you can follow up in writing with us. If you'd like to, just raise your hand, introduce yourself. Yeah, Lori L, absolutely, come on.
Thanks. Sorry, this is my first meeting with you guys. Does that mean like I'm on your committee now? Are you going to include me? And when's our next meeting?
That's a good question. You know what? This is my first RAC too, so we're in the same boat. So you were identified as a RAC participant for this meeting alone. This is going to be our only RAC meeting. But if you're signed up for notifications on Gov Delivery or Delivery Gov for RACs, you'll receive information there. So just check out that website and just make sure you're signed up for updates.
Thank you.
And we really appreciate you being here. Yeah. Anyone else?
I'm just going to chime in, Kristen, I've sat through a lot of racks and actually facilitated some back in the day. You've done an excellent job facilitating this. Thank you. It's not an easy process, I know, and but I was shocked to hear you say this was your first one, but
Oh,
well done.
very kind. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. You guys have been a great group to work with. So, Natasha?
I just want to second that. I have sat through a whole lot of racks in my 20 years in the field. Also shocked to hear that this is your first. This has gone very smooth, and some great conversations. Even though I was quiet, I was doing a lot of listening and notes, and obviously the people that were giving feedback have a lot more experience or know some of the things that I didn't, that I've made notes about. So thank you, everybody. This was a great one.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Nicolette.
I would also third that, but in addition to that, I do want to say too, I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of the draft in and of itself. And Russ and your team really kind of looking at the statutes, being able to really kind of explain things that maybe we didn't understand. I think this is probably one of the best racks that I have gone on and sat on, and I sit on a lot of them. So I just really impressed with how well this went. And for all of you that are like, this is my very first time, consider yourself blessed that this was as smooth and as well organized as a process, because a lot of times they are not. So kudos to you guys and your team. This was really well done.
Thank you for that. And this is all the credit goes to Kristen and the policy and technical assistance team led by John Thompson. They have done, when I got to this state on April the 14th, they were already working on this. They have done an incredible job, a heavy lift, and we really appreciate everything that you all have done for us and helping us maneuver through this. And we know we're not done yet, but this has really been helpful. So I appreciate you all.
And I'll put, oh, perfect. Susanna put my email in the chat. Like I said, you still have through close of business on February 10th to send us any written comments. You don't have to send us the comments you provided today, but you're more than welcome to. We definitely got everything noted. And then just look for updated materials on the RAC website related to updated materials and recordings. And with that, we'll say thank you and adjourn.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, everyone, thank you so much. For those who are sticking around, just want to make sure you don't have any last questions, as we will be closing out the Zoom at 3:55.
Thank you, ASL and CART. You guys are amazing. Thank you.